that We Charity was the only game in town. Well, they were in your world, but obviously this deal fell apart, and you need to understand that your conflict of interest has put you here.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Angus, your statement that in my world or in our cabinet, we were the only game in town is simply untrue. It is
That's what you said.
Professional public service that put forward the recommendation that said to us, having done their due diligence, that the only organization with the scale and the capacity to deliver this grant program would be we. Personally, I thought we were going to be able to deliver it through the Canada Service Corps, which I created 2 or 3 years ago and was all about rewarding service and creating opportunities for service for young people. I would have loved to seen it supercharged and accelerated to be able to deliver many thousands of opportunities for young people throughout the country. But that wasn't able to be done. And the public service themselves made the recommendation that we had to go with We Charity, and I was not involved in that
last
recommendation
question,
at all,
Mr. Angus, and it'll have to be a very quick one.
Well, very quickly, Mr. Prime Minister, as the former youth voice, you could have been talking to the Federation of Students when you were telling them that they were not eligible for CERB, when you told them to work for less than the minimum wage, when you pushed this deal with the Kielburger brothers and refused to recuse yourself, and not a dime has gone out the door.
Over to you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Angus and the NDP have said this a few times, this idea that volunteering is somehow working for less than the minimum wage. I'd like to remind Mr. Angus that
Mr. Angus, the Prime Minister is the floor.
The heart of this country. And people get out and volunteer not for money, but because they want to make a difference in the world. And if you start calculating every volunteer as working for less than the minimum wage, then you are missing a really important part, Mr. Angus, of the fabric of Canada. And getting young people to step up and volunteer is something
we will have to end that round there, gentlemen. We are going now to 5-minute rounds, and we'll start with Mr. Poilievre, followed by Mr. McLeod. Mr. Poilievre, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'll be taking Mr. Poilievre's time.
Oh, okay. Who was that yelled there?
MP Barrett, sir.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Mr. Barrett. Yeah, I had Mr. Poilievre on my list. I'll not take my talking from your time. You get the floor.
Thank you. Prime Minister, just looking for a number. How many times would one of your ministers need to be found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act for you to fire them? How many times, sir?
Obviously, our cabinet is formed of extraordinary individuals who serve their country, and I have confidence in their ability to do just that.
How many times would they need to break the act before you would fire them?
Obviously, anytime someone contravenes the Ethics Commissioners Act, we take it very seriously, and we'll look at each situation based on the gravity of the situation.
Okay, well, you claimed in your opening remarks that you had basically no idea what was happening in your government. Who are you holding accountable for this decision?
Mr. Barrett, over the past number of months, as a government and as a Prime Minister, I've been involved in the decisions around CERB, around the wage subsidy, around helping Canadians through this extraordinary time of crisis. We've been involved in working quickly and flexibly with an extraordinarily professional public service to deliver tremendous programs to help Canadians.
We will have to go back to Mr. Barrett,
every aspect of many of these programs.
Prime Minister, there was no vetting done of We Charity. There are major concerns with this organization. Who is responsible for the vetting?
The public service would have done their due diligence to ensure which organizations could deliver the program as we had laid it out, and they found that only We Charity had the ability to do that through their due diligence process.
Mr. Barrett.
The organization that you approved, sir, was, you know, you had a massive contract given to a shell company with no experience running a government grant program. That's a problem. Someone should be held accountable. Who are you going to fire?
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Barrett, the public service, which has delivered extraordinary programs, including with third-party organizations. When we wanted to help out shelters, we went through United Way. When we wanted to help food banks, the public service reached out to Food Banks Canada to make sure that they could get that money out. They have consistently worked with third-party organizations. As part of their decision to do that, they have done full due diligence on that organization's ability to deliver the program. And
Prime Minister,
Cabinet, they were capable of
Prime
doing
Minister,
this
Cabinet is responsible for decisions, not the public service. A major mistake was made. Someone in Cabinet should be held accountable. Which minister will you fire? Minister Morneau, Minister Chagger, which minister?
The decision in Cabinet was not as to which organization should deliver the Canada Student Summer Grants. The decision in Cabinet was, should we have a summer grants program or not? That was the binary choice given to us by the public service and the minister, and Cabinet made a decision that creating opportunities for young people to serve across the country.
Do you still think we was a good
worthwhile.
choice? Do you still think we was a good choice to run this program, sir?
We will never know, because they pulled out of that being able to deliver the program, partially because I hadn't recused myself and created complications here, and that's something that I deeply regret, because creating opportunities for young people to serve is something that matters deeply to all Canadians across the country.
Mr. Barrett, I'll not take the time from you, Mr. Barrett, but somebody's got their mic on and some sound is coming through. Okay, Mr. Barrett.
Were you aware that the WE organization had fired its board chair shortly before they were given this contract?
No, I was not.
Were you aware that WE had fired a very large portion of its staff?
No, I was not.
How many times did your family members receive remuneration from this organization since you've been elected as Prime Minister?
As I said, my wife works on an unpaid basis for WE and other organizations, and had it cleared by the Ethics Commissioner in advance for both her engagement, because she's been an advocate and a TV and radio host professionally through her entire career, that her activities with this organization and other organizations for free, with being reimbursed for expenses, was something that was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner when she first wanted to become an advocate around these issues with that organization.
You have a minute left, Mr. Barrett.
So every dollar that your wife received in reimbursement or in payment was cleared in advance by the Commissioner?
As I said, Mr. Barrett, this was unpaid work my wife was doing for a cause that she believes in deeply, talking about destigmatization of mental health, empowerment of young people, particularly girls. This is something that she believed in deeply. And yes, we got approval by the Ethics Commissioner that she could volunteer with this organization and have expenses related to that volunteerism reimbursed.
So I want to go.
Question, keep it tight.
Well, I want to know if the Prime Minister can tell us what due diligence looks like. We have an organization that had no assets. It was a shell corporation. They were in violation of bank covenants, a fired board chair. They were firing employees, and the Government of Canada handed over a $500 million contract for them to administer. What was that due diligence that was done, sir?
The public service ensures that any third-party partner that we work with on delivery of a program is capable of delivering the program. They have a rigorous and strong process to do that. And I have confidence in our public service to be able to do that, particularly because during this time of pandemic, they had demonstrated with many third-party organizations an ability to get help to Canadians in record fashion when people needed it the most.
Thank you both. Turning then to Mr. McLeod, who will be followed by Mr. Poilievre on my list. Mr. McLeod, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Prime Minister for joining us here today. I'm glad that when the question was brought to the Cabinet table to run a summer student program, you said yes, because I think it's very important that we do so. And I think that's something we should continue to try to achieve. This is our 5th meeting on the topic of government spending, WE and the Canada Summer Student Service Grant. Throughout this whole study, my greatest concern is that for the whole month since it was determined that we was no longer going to administer the program is now in jeopardy. That is one whole month that the youth have missed out on experiences and assistance that the Canada Student Service Grant could have provided. In many parts of the country, including here in the North, I'm the Member of Parliament for Northwest Territories, for those that don't know, and Indigenous communities, many of our youth already face many barriers to opportunities that other parts of the country enjoy. We are remote. We struggle with connectivity. There's a high cost of living. And I need to ask you if the government is going to address the fact that our youth have lost out because of this delay.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod, for your words, and quite frankly for your advocacy for Northern youth and indeed all youth across the country. I share those concerns, and that's why we move forward with multiple ways to support young people through this pandemic. We looked at a $9 billion package to support young people that includes deferral of student loans, that includes creation of summer jobs and opportunities for them at a time where we know that their regular summer jobs may not exist because of the pandemic. And it also included the Canada Emergency Student Response Benefit that gives $1,250 per month to students who need it, $2,000 a month to students who have dependents. And that was something that we worked out with other parties as well. So there are many, many different things we're doing for young people. This particular program, the Canada Student Service Grant, was created to incentivize and to reward young people who are stepping up in their communities. It was about giving a grant to young people for that service that they were so many of them doing already. What we continue to see, even without this financial reward we would have been able to deliver and the coordination across the country, we see young people in the North and the South, right across the country, stepping up and volunteering in community organizations because they know that this is a historic time in which their actions, their voices, their efforts can shape our country for the better. And again, I am always deeply grateful to young people and their leadership within our country.
Mr. McLeod.
Yeah, thank you for that response. I heard your response to my colleague when he asked about this program earlier, and I'm hoping that I can use this opportunity to encourage the delivery of this program, maybe through the public service instead, and consideration to adjusting the original eligibility period to sometime down the road into October, or perhaps reprofiling the grant funding into another program to support young Canadians. Is that something Cabinet would be interested in talking about?
Absolutely. We know that we need to do more for young people, and encouraging young people to volunteer and be involved in their communities is a great way, not just of giving them experiences and opportunity, but of actually tangibly helping out seniors, young people, marginalized people, community organizations. These are things that young people, young students stepping up can make a huge difference in. So we're going to continue to look for ways to do it. Like I said, the Canada Student Corps, which was created a few years ago, is exactly about that, about coordinating volunteer organizations to create opportunities for young people across the country. It wasn't able to scale up in a way that allowed the public service to choose it to deliver this CSSG program. But as we continue to look for other ways to deliver the CSSG, I know that the Canada Service Corps, which is internal to government, is something that people are looking at very carefully.
You'll have to split 30 seconds with the Prime Minister, Mr. McLeod.
I just wanted to ask if you could just lay out some of the challenges that the Canada Service Corps program faced that made them unable to deliver the program initially.
Very quickly, Prime Minister.
We were hoping to launch a first pilot project with about 7,000 volunteers this coming September. as a way of starting the activities of the Canada Service Corps in a tangible way. That's a far cry from the tens of thousands of volunteers that we would have needed or would have wanted through this program to give grants to in this time of pandemic. It was a scale problem and a program delivery challenge.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Poilievre, who will be followed by Ms. Zerowitz. Mr. Poilievre, 5 minutes, please.
Yes or no question, Mr. Chair. Prime Minister, you twice were found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act. After those two convictions, did you decide to read the Act?
You got 14 seconds, Prime Minister.
Yes, I have read the Act a number of times.
Are you aware of Section 21?
Yes, since I've read the Act, I'm aware of Section 21.
What does it say?
I can pull it up for you, but if you have it in front of you, you can remind me which.
Well, it says a public
is.
office holder, of which you are one, shall recuse himself or herself from any discussion, decision, debate, or vote in any matter in which, in respect of which he or she would be in a conflict of interest. Now, what you've admitted today is not just that you were in a conflict of interest, but that you consciously recognized in your May cabinet meeting that such a conflict might exist. That it didn't just slide by your desk, that you were consciously aware that there was an inappropriate link to your family that would put you in a conflict. Why did you, at that moment, not call the ethics commissioner and recuse yourself?
That is simply not true, Mr. Poilievre. The issue of advancing issues for one's own family. And by the way, the ethics commissioner is looking into this right now, and I fully trust his judgment on determining it. But at the same time, my concern around recusing myself was a question around perceptions, because I knew full well that this Canada Summer Students Grant Program was not going to directly benefit my mother or my brother.
Your 16 seconds are up. Your 16 seconds are up. I'm going to ask you again, because nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. So you've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
how much?
has
just the dollar figure
through her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is proud
how much
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How
as
much?
Well.
I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me, and quite
you don't
frankly,
know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million. Really?
Can I answer, Mr. Poilievre?
I'm waiting. You haven't done an answer so far. Let's make this the first one.
My mother has worked as an advocate.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Speaker for many good organizations across the country.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are being asked a direct question at a parliamentary committee.
To support her because she does her own work, and I'm proud of the work that she does. Point of order. But I do not feel that it is my responsibility to peer into the work my mother is doing, because I have
point of order to suspend.
That she's doing.
Point of order to suspend,
I've come
please.
to learn that the chairperson's power has gone out and is no longer part of this meeting. May I propose that we?
It's okay. We can keep. Prime Minister and I can continue talking.
No.
I suspected that might be a problem. It's very convenient timing for the lights to go out.
Look, I got a message to the effect that his power has gone out. I have no reason to distrust him.
I hope you don't pull the fire alarm now.
Yeah, well, look, there's no intent in my own private home here in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have a fire alarm.
Mr. Fraser,
I propose
the general process is that the vice chair assumes the chairing of the meeting. So we'll continue.
And that would be me. So we'll continue the meeting. And I now give the floor to the member for Carleton. Mr. Prime Minister, you have. I'm going to ask you one last time. How much did your family get from this organization? How much?
Have you read the Conflict of Interest Act, Mr.
Yes,
Poilievre?
I have.
How does it define family?
I'm asking you.
How does it define
I'm asking
family?
you how much your family got.
The Conflict of Interest Act defines family as spouse and direct dependents.
Point of order. So you're not going to answer that
family
question.
has not received
Point of order.
any,
So you're not going to
money
answer the question then. So you're not going to answer the question about how much your family received. Okay, you're right.
Hold it, gentlemen. If you,
for working with we, and it was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner ahead of time.
Okay.
Mr.
Point of order, can I welcome back
Poilievre.
Wayne Easter? Can I welcome back Wayne Easter, a man we've deeply missed? Come on, Wayne, where have you been? Were you getting some coffee?
Look,
I had
you
things
know,
under control for you while you were gone.
I
God help
imagine
us,
that,
Wayne.
Pierre, it wouldn't be the first time you tried to put my lights out, and that's exactly what happened, Pierre. We got a thunderstorm here. Anyway, where will you're well into your 5 minutes, but go with one last question.
Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to conclude by asking you. You claim that you have no knowledge of the amount that has been paid in expenses to your spouse. You correctly pointed out that the Act defines family as including a spouse. Therefore, you know you're under investigation regarding the Act. I'm going to ask you again, how much in total, and I'm looking for a dollar figure here, sir, how much did your spouse receive in reimbursed expenses or other benefits from this organization? How much?
Your original question, Mr. Poilievre, was how much was my immediate family?
I asked you a different question now. How much?
Mr. Poilievre, the Prime Minister has the floor.
My wife has never been paid since I was Prime Minister.
Reimbursed for expenses.
Mr. Poilievre, could we please have order? We'll allow the Prime Minister to answer the question, and then we'll move on to Ms. Zerowitz. Sorry, Julie. Mr. Prime Minister, you have about 30 seconds here.
The Ethics Commissioner has fully cleared my wife to continue her advocacy and her work with We Charity and other organizations.
How much?
In the kind of work that she's been doing all her life.
Just the dollar figure.
She's doing it unpaid for We. She is not being paid by We for her advocacy or for her podcasts. They are simply reimbursing her for expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Poilievre, and I'm sorry for leaving the line. We'll go to Ms. Zerowitz next, and then we'll be followed by Ms. Goodrow, Mary Helen, and then Mr. Angus. So Ms. Zerowitz, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And you're always calling me Mr.
I know that.
Anyways, Prime Minister, I want to say a huge thanks to you for being here today. I also want to say a heartfelt thanks on behalf of Davenport residents, particularly during the early days of the pandemic. The daily announcements that you made were a lifeline for them, both in terms of information and in terms of the support that we were providing. They really received the feeling that we had their back. And so I want to say a huge thanks to you. The first thing I want to talk about is just about recusing yourself. You had indicated that you felt you should have recused yourself because of the perception. I want to ask a question. If you were to recuse yourself from every decision that might indirectly impact your family, how would that affect your ability to serve as Prime Minister and MP for Papineau?
You're muted. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously that is an important question. There are many things I do and we do as a government that impact millions of Canadians across the country. For example, my mother is a long and well-known long-standing advocate for mental health issues. One of the very first commitments we made to Canadians was to invest $5 billion into mental health supports across the provinces. It is possible that I shouldn't have been involved in that decision because my mom is a well-known advocate and works in the mental health universe. Obviously, that would be silly. It is not a conflict, but these kinds of things constantly come up. That's why when the issue of We came forward, my concern was to push back on it, to delay it from going forward to Cabinet so that more due diligence could happen. In that case, looking back on it, it would have been better had, for perception's sake, I simply step away and not be involved at all, and perhaps the organization and the program would be delivered right now. But I always look to try and serve Canadians the best possible way. And around youth programs, I have a level of experience on that meant that I felt that I was useful in contributing, and that none of this program was in any way going to benefit any members of my family. And that was something that I was very comfortable.
Thank you. My next question is, you've made it clear, there were a number of questions around board governance for We and the number of layoffs that had taken place at We Charity. And you'd clearly articulated for Canadians and anyone listening that the due diligence is the responsibility of our civil service. I did want to ask, though, Mr. Shugat testified that no one in the public service raised any red flags about the We Charity's financial well-being. So I wanted to just directly ask you, did you see or hear any red flags being raised about the We Charity's finances and the resources? And the second part of my question is, you had asked Minister Chagger to speak with the head of Treasury Board for some additional oversight. So if you could sort of talk to both of those, because I see a bit of a correlation there.
Obviously, there are now certain media reporting and questions about the We organization's financial structures and activities. Those obviously weren't public knowledge and weren't flagged to me at any point during the May 8th conversation or the May 21st or 22nd conversation. In regards to the extra oversight, I recommended we bring in between Minister Chagger and the Treasury Board. That was to lay out the payments to this third-party We organization for delivering the program in specific tranches that would provide an update before further funds were flowed once they worked through the initial cohorts.
Thank you. And then
Julie.
Thank you. So Minister Morneau had mentioned to us that over 70 emergency programs were introduced with a spend of over $200 billion. Can you give Canadians an idea about what is your involvement in the big policy decisions that come before Cabinet?
Through the months of April and May specifically, I was working all day on policy briefs and design for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, for the wage subsidy, for supports for Canadians, for responding to PPE challenges. It was a time of extraordinary activity for the government as the civil service stepped up to deliver things that had never been done before in timeframes that would have been unimaginable. And as a cabinet and as a prime minister, we were tremendously active in this time because we knew that Canadians were counting on us to be there for them as we asked them to do extremely difficult things, to leave their jobs, to stay home, to hunker down so we could defeat this virus or slow this virus. We needed to be there for them, and we were deeply involved in every aspect of how we move forward.
We will have to move on, Prime Minister. I have Ms. Goodrow next, then Mr. Angus.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, good afternoon. Hello, Chair. I'd like to leave my time to my colleague, Mr. I'd like to give my time to Mr. Fortin.
Before you start, Rial, for the official opposition, we will have a slot open and then we will end the day. Okay, Mr. Poilievre will be on and we'll end with Mr. Fraser. Mr. Fortin.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trudeau, would it not have
been simple? You announced the program.
Simple d'être transparent et de dire.
You should have just told people that you about the relationship you had with We Charity and your family. On April 29th, I didn't know that We Charity was involved in this.
I didn't realize that they were involved in this program on April 29th, rather. The decision hadn't been made yet. You didn't announce that you had ties with We. And on April 22nd, Mr. Kielburger said there wasn't a call from your office and seemed to suggest this. Mr. Fortin, you do not have the correct dates. At the end of the line, Mr. Trudeau, do you not feel that you betrayed the trust of Quebecers and all Canadians by acting in such a manner? And acting in what manner? You excused yourself and even delayed the decision to make the choice of We Charity because you knew you'd be subject to scrutiny, even though you knew you never recused yourself from the decision table, and you knew that when you'd be voting at the cabinet table, that this would be an issue. Quebecers feel betrayed, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Fortin, I was not in a position of conflict of interest. And why did you apologize? I apologize because of the perception that ties with my family would have been, I should have recused myself. You're saying that today, but you know full well. Question, how come you didn't do so at the beginning?
Mr. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
You knew that we had to rapidly deliver innovative programs to help people who were in a tough situation, and that's exactly what we did. As I said, I didn't know that We Charity was chosen. Mr. Trudeau, you were blamed in the SNC Lavalin affair and other affairs, and now you're being blamed for this. When will you decide to step aside and ask Mr. Morneau to step down as finance minister? You said that the lobbyist register wasn't your job to look at, but answer, Mr. Fortin, since the past 4 or 5 months, the government and the Minister of Finance in particular has delivered assistance to millions and millions of Canadians who were in a very tough situation.
The floor is the Prime Minister's. If he could finish, please.
We had to make enormous differences for Canadians, and that's what we were focused on. That's very disappointing, Mr. Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Fortin. Mr. Angus, 2.5 minutes, and then on to Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Angus.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Prime Minister, 2017, after you're found guilty with the Aga Khan deal, you said, we are going to work with the Office of the Ethics Commissioner in the new year to ensure that as we go forward in full and complete compliance with the rules and the rules in place. You tell us that you held this project back, you did the due diligence, you were aware that there were perceptions that might be problematic. We're not talking about perceptions, we're talking about breaches of the law. In your due diligence, why did you not bother to talk to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner? It is so obvious, Mr. Trudeau, that these conflicts were there. Why did you think it didn't apply to you?
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Angus, the Public Service came forward with a recommendation to Cabinet to move forward either with this specific third-party provider that was We Charity, or else not move forward with the program at all. That was the binary choice we proposed. I did not influence the Public Service to choose this organization. And indeed, when the Public Service came forward with this organization, I said, you know what? Let's put the brakes on it. Let's make sure that it's done absolutely everything right, because there are going to be questions because of the connections with my family on this. Yes, in hindsight, I should have recused myself, and perhaps that the program would be delivering for students right across the country right now. But I did not. Instead, I put the brakes on it and said, let's make sure that it is doing things the right way so that we don't have any communications or public problems.
Back to Mr. Angus.
I guess with all due respect, instead of continually throwing the civil service under the bus, I'm asking about your judgment, about your legal obligations, because the real losers here are the young people. Statistics Canada says that it's going to take 5 to 7 years for them to recover from the damage. And we had students asking why they were being denied CERB, asking why you were telling them that volunteerism is going to be great, they can work for less than minimum wage. You know, for students who have massive levels of student debt, they don't got $41,000 checks to cover off their losses. They were looking to you as their champion. And I'm really concerned, Mr. Prime Minister, that you think this issue of paying students, university students, a fair wage is somehow an attack on volunteerism. To be the champion of youth isn't to do a high five with Craig Kielburger.
Mr. Angus, your question, please. Sure,
because none of the money got out, not a dime. These students are still waiting. You failed them.
Mr. Prime Minister.
I'm happy to correct Mr. Angus. The Canada Emergency Student Benefit since May 15th has given to 724,000 applicants a total value of $2.1 billion directly for students. That's part of the $9 billion package. The student CERB has made a huge difference. The summer jobs we've created, the deferral of student loans. Yes, I regret that we weren't able to put out
Mr. Angus, the Prime Minister has the floor.
To recognize volunteerism that young people are doing right across the country. That is a piece of it that is disappointing and that I regret and I apologize for. But the ensemble of things that we've done to help students across this country in this historic pandemic has made a real difference in the lives of students and in communities across this country that are seeing young people step up and contribute.
We've had equal time, Prime Minister. We'll have to move on to Mr. Poilievre, and the concluding questions will go to Mr. Fraser. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Poilievre, and please don't shut my lights out this time, will you? Go ahead, Pierre.
Don't shut your own out either. You claimed that the program's purposes were threefold: help youth through the pandemic, help charities get through the pandemic, and help students pay for their post-secondary in the fall. Which of these could the Canada Summer Jobs Program not have done?
Actually, the three aims that I listed for the CSSG were encourage young people to step up, help out community organizations, and recognize volunteerism and reward volunteerism by students as a way of making a difference in this pandemic.
Back to Mr. Poilievre.
So you can't name a single one of these objectives that could not have been fulfilled by the Canada Summer Jobs Program.
That's not true, Pierre. The third one, recognizing volunteerism, is not done by the Canada Summer Jobs
Recognizing paid volunteerism. So you called it volunteerism so that you could take it outside of the Canada Summer Jobs Program and give it to your friends at WE. My next question: when you directed,
Mr. Poilievre, the Prime Minister's got about 8 seconds to answer that one. Then we'll go to your question.
The CSSG was about recognizing and rewarding volunteerism. It's not about jobs. It was about volunteerism, and that, unfortunately, is something that we can't do because this program.
Back to Mr. Poilievre.
You just misused the word so that you could justify outsourcing a program that already effectively exists within the government. Now, when you did that, you directed $500 million, and yes, you did. You were the head of the cabinet. Did you know that the group to which you were directing that $500 million was in violation of its bank covenant? Yes or no?
That is not something that we had as information at that point.
Did you know that the government money would go into a real estate shell foundation instead of into the WE charity? Yes or no?
The details on the payment were worked out by our professional public service in terms of how the contribution agreement flowed.
So did you know that the chair of the board had resigned? Yes or no?
No.
So you clearly did not do any due diligence of your own. As the chair of the cabinet responsible for approving a decision, you should have had some basic facts. Sir, you were using $500 million of taxpayers' money here. You had a fiduciary responsibility. Why didn't you ask these questions?
We have flowed tens of billions of dollars through the CERB, through the
question isn't about the
benefit, through various ways to help Canadians, and we were very, very active in making sure that flows right. There are many, many different programs, and in cabinet government, we trust the ministers and the public service to do their jobs and make sure that things are delivered in the right way. And in this case, they did.
Monsieur le Président, le temps est venu.
Mr. Chair, the Prime Minister needs to stop blaming civil servants. It was his decision.
Channel, because I can't make you out. I'm hearing two languages at once.
Le temps est venu.
It's time for the Prime Minister to stop blaming the public service. He is an elected official who is responsible toward Canadians, and he needs to ensure that money is spent properly. It's not up to public servants who are forced to spend nearly $500 million to a group that paid his family nearly $500,000. Will the Prime Minister take personal responsibility for approving this enormous amount, which was given out to his friends? First of all, I'd like to make something clear. I have nothing but admiration and respect and deep gratitude for the public service, which is professional and has been able to deliver extraordinary programs during this pandemic to help millions of Canadians. It has had a real impact on the work that they're doing, and it continues to do this work. Their excellence was applied to programs for youth, and I have confidence that they made the right recommendation to deliver this program in the best way possible. And unfortunately, in part because I did not recuse myself, there was a perception that led to not being able to deliver this specific program. But the suite of programs that we deliver to Canadians, I have a simple question for you. How many times did a minister in your government need to break the Ethics Act before being sacked? How many times? We take it very seriously every time there are ethics issues. How many times? And how many times?
And he has the right to answer. Mr. Prime Minister.
We will obviously
How many times?
Any breaches of official codes. We will ensure that there are consequences, and we will look at every situation differently.
Fine. In English, I'll ask my last question.
Your last question is over. You're over your 5 minutes. Last night, you people were giving me the gears for not sticking and adhering to time. I'm adhering to time today. Mr. Fraser, you have the last round, 5 minutes, and then the Prime Minister will be released.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Prime Minister. Before I begin, I do want to express my gratitude for your assistance in securing a public inquiry into the mass shootings that took place in my home province of Nova Scotia. It means to the world to us at home. To the matter at hand, you've acknowledged during this meeting and previously that you should have recused yourself from the decision. I appreciate your willingness to admit that. You've also mentioned when it first came up at Cabinet, you pushed back. I've got competing concepts of a need to conduct due diligence and at the same time to have recused yourself. Of course, you remain responsible for the oversight of the policy direction and program implementation of the Government of Canada. And though I believe you were right to say you probably should have recused yourself from that conversation, I have difficulty how you would have simultaneously exercised the kind of oversight that caused you to push back during that May 8th meeting. Had you recused yourself, how would this additional oversight had taken place if you had not been involved in the process of the discussion at the Cabinet table?
That is an excellent question. The quick answer is that other members of Cabinet would have stepped up and ensured proper oversight. But you do highlight one of the challenges of making policy in as condensed a fashion as we have during this pandemic. We have been flowing aid to Canadians, to different groups, filling gaps across the country with innovative partnerships, with creative ways of approaching things, because we needed to be there for Canadians. So yes, things were truncated, things were shortened. Programs that would have taken 6 months to develop and deliver were instead done in the matter of weeks. So it was a particularly challenging situation. And if you'll allow me, Mr. Fraser, let me also say thank you to you and to your fellow Nova Scotia MPs for being so strong in your advocacy to make sure that the answers get given to those families. Your leadership on this has been both personally and professionally appreciated.
Thank you very much. So the process that we've learned to date, that there was a public service recommendation. We learned 2 days ago when the Kielburgers were at committee that the public service actually recommended that they adopt a new foundation, essentially, or at least approved a new foundation to have the flow through money to make sure that the We Charity was willing to accept liability. They said only a third party can do it. I understand, to your point about other members of Cabinet providing that oversight, that it would have gone to Cabinet committee before it came to full Cabinet May, where you still pushed back. So I'm curious, it sounded like your reservation was about the possibility that there might be a perception that your family or people close to you would have directly or indirectly benefited. Were you satisfied when it came back to Cabinet, when this was finally approved, that there was no possibility that your family directly or indirectly was actually going to benefit from the Canada Student Service Grant program?
Yes, there is no way that my family would have benefited from these grants to students across the country.
Okay. Thank you, Prime Minister. So back to the matter at hand. I got to say, I was a former youth leader. I took part in different programs, the Canada Summer Jobs Program, student government, and the like. It hugely shaped who I am. I want to build on Mr. McLeod's line of questioning. Where do we go from here? I actually still very much support the values that you outlined behind the Student Service Grant Program. I understand there's going to be difficulties over the course of this summer implementing something that would provide that kind of opportunity. What's the next step? How do we actually get this program or some other support on the rails to actually provide the kind of support to students that you have clearly communicated as being important to this government?
And your answer, we'll have to wrap it up, Prime Minister.
First of all, throughout this pandemic, we've had to deliver certain things and suspend other things. Our priority has been on helping people through this pandemic, and that really needed to be our priority, particularly for students, which is why we put out the Student CERB, which is why we've created new jobs, which is why we're deferring student loans. This was an additional way for young people to be involved, to volunteer, to reward volunteerism for young people throughout the country. And it is still a goal of this government. That's why we created the Canada Service Corps a number of years ago. Youth volunteerism actually is one of the things that brought me into politics a dozen years ago, because I was working with Katimovic and realized that we needed to do more youth volunteerism and youth service in this country. So it will continue to be a goal of mine and something that really is important for the country, to see young people stepping up in their communities, helping out people who need help, discovering the value of service and becoming engaged, active citizens in their communities, in their country for the rest of their lives. This was an opportunity to fit it into a COVID context, but even as COVID continues and even beyond COVID, getting young people to serve in their communities will always remain a goal for this government.
Okay, with that, on behalf of the committee, Prime Minister, I thank you for first appearing before the committee and taking the extra time, the extra 30 minutes to, well, 32 really now, to spend with us today. So thank you again, and we will, Madam Clerk, I expect the Chief of Staff is waiting in the wings. All right, we will suspend for 5 minutes and come back with the Chief of Staff. Thank you, Prime Minister. Meetings. So we'll go there, and I'll turn over the floor to you. I might say to the clerk before we start, Ms. Telford, that I already got blacked out once today. There is an unbelievable thunder and lightning storm here. If it happens again, you will know why. So we'll turn it over to you, Ms. Telford. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. I'd first like to thank all of you for your important work and for giving me the opportunity to answer your questions on the implementation of the Canada Student Service Grant here today. Let me start by saying this is a remarkable time, and from the day that we learned a Canadian had contracted COVID-19 to what is happening during the time period you're interested in, this pandemic that we are still fighting represents a once-in-a-generation challenge for our country. I started working for the Prime Minister after my mat leave, and what a journey it has been. I ran his leadership campaign in 2012-13 and went on to lead the 2015 campaign, and I've been his Chief of Staff ever since. And unbelievably, my son just turned 9. So some of you may know that I'm a person interested in data. And data has always helped me assess what we are doing well and what we need to do better. And these past few months, every day, we were all waking up to, some very alarming statistics. They were more than statistics. Hundreds of people dead because of COVID-19. Hundreds of thousands of people applying for the CERB because they lost their job. Millions of families going through a really tough time. Millions of women in lower wage jobs being especially hurt. Women's participation in our economy is being set back. And every day, daily projections were telling us, and still tell us, that if we weren't and aren't successful in slowing the spread of the virus, things would get much, much worse. Le travail du Premier Ministre consiste...
The Prime Minister's work is to help Canadians in need. My work as Chief of Staff is to support him in everything he does. I have worked in the political sphere for quite some time now, and we've had to face challenges that are unprecedented. And it's so gratifying for me to have the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of Canadians. Since the beginning of this crisis, we've announced a myriad of measures to protect the health of Canadians and to help people who've lost their jobs and prepare the recovery of our economy.
We acted as fast as we could, knowing we might make mistakes along the way because people were really struggling. So we needed to move quick. Take the emergency response benefit or the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We'd already announced these programs when we realized we needed to make them more accessible, more generous, simpler. But job one was get these programs out the door to help people. When we realized that improvements were needed, we made changes. The CERB and the wage subsidy has since helped millions of Canadians right across the country. Back in April, our government announced a $9 billion plan to help young people get through the pandemic. It included measures such as the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, differing student loans, and yes, the Canada Student Summer Grant. I want to go back to the first time we discussed a potential aid package for students. On April 5th, there was a meeting by phone, as they all were at this time, between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. It was a stock take on the entirety of our government's ongoing economic response to the pandemic. There were 15 different decision points on the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy that Sunday evening, and it was being announced the next day. That was the focus of the call. We also talked about an orphan well program for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland to help workers in the energy sector who have been hit especially hard by the crisis. At the end of that conversation, the Finance Minister spoke about gaps he had identified in existing programs like the CERB. We knew that some people were still falling through the cracks. People like seniors, seasonal workers, and yes, students. At the time, the Ministry of Finance was thinking about some form of financial assistance, more Canada summer jobs, and a moratorium on student loan payments. We also talked about using the Canada Service Corps to encourage and support young people who want to volunteer and help their community during this pandemic. That was a very brief part of a larger conversation, and everyone agreed that there was more work to do. Just a few weeks later, after a lot of hard work by many people across the government, the Prime Minister announced a $9 billion aid package for students, which included the items I just listed. The Canada Summer Student Grant Program was 1/10 of that package.
When I think back to the period in question, it was at the end of April, and the Public Service sent us a briefing note about the possibility that we could be calling on an external organization to implement the CSSG. Questions were raised in terms of the government's ability to implement this program, and whether we could directly pay students financial compensation. On April 8th, I learned for the first time, at the same time as the Prime Minister, the proposal from the Minister of Diversity and Youth stating that the We Charity would implement this program. The recommendation from the Public Service was examined and approved by the Cabinet, and we learned about it a few minutes before the Cabinet meeting on April 8th, that we would have to look at this recommendation. As the Prime Minister said in his statement, we both had concerns, and that is why on May 8th, we took the CSSG off the Cabinet meeting agenda. The Minister and myself both had questions. We wanted more information about the efficacy of such a program and using an external organization for this program. And to be quite honest, we were also concerned about people's perceptions. In politics, it's important to look at how students would be perceived, and we searched support from the Public Service, who stated that the We Charity would be the only one that could implement this program, and without a doubt, it would be a good partner for this initiative. When the finance note was approved, the Prime Minister added an additional provision stating that a minister would have to go back to the President of the Treasury Board to seek financing for this project.
This proposal to help students was recommended by the Public Service. This was not a choice between different organizations to deliver the program. This was a choice between going forward with the program or not. I will add that we had previously received the Ethics Commissioner's approval for Sophie Gregoire-Trudeau's work engagement with the We Charity, so I wasn't aware of any conflicts. You have heard the Prime Minister say that he regrets not recusing himself. I have regrets about that too. Obviously, this didn't happen as we intended to, and this is not what we had envisioned, and I share in that responsibility. Over the past few weeks, I have thought a lot about this program. I have thought about what we could do better and how we could apply lessons we've learned going forward. In hindsight, I recognize that while we did ask many questions to make this program a success, we could have done better. We could have done more. We could have added yet another layer of scrutiny to avoid any potential perception of favoritism. Mr. Chair, I work with a team of committed, hardworking individuals. We're not perfect, but we are committed to being better and to doing more. And perhaps most importantly right now, we remain committed to serving and supporting as many Canadians as we can, as quickly as we can. As the daughter of retired public servants, I have the utmost respect, not only for public service, but for those who choose it as a career. And I want to take this moment to thank them and my colleagues for the work they continue to do under especially challenging circumstances. I believe that we all get into public service to help others. And what a time for all of us to be doing that. We thought renegotiating NAFTA was a challenge. Well, this pandemic, I am sure, is the challenge of our generation and of my life. To have the chance to take up this work during this time with this team under the leadership of this Prime Minister has been and remains a privilege. With that, I'm pleased to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Telford. The first round of questions I have on my list for the 6-minute round is Mr. Barrett, Ms. Sirowitz, Mr. Fortin, and Mr. Julian. Mr. Barrett, you're on. 6 minutes is yours.
Ma'am, this committee passed a motion calling on the Prime Minister to testify for 3 hours. This meeting is the only one listed in his schedule for today. Frankly, I find it a bit disrespectful to Canadians that he couldn't find a couple extra hours to answer questions. Why couldn't the Prime Minister respect the House of Commons and attend for the full time today?
I don't know whether that's on the topic, but we'll let it go. Ms. Telford.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that the Prime Minister not only accepted the invitation and was pleased to come before the committee, but and originally the invitation was for 1 hour, which he accepted, and then he extended his time and stayed for just over 90 minutes.
Will you schedule him to attend the remaining time requested?
I believe that is perhaps a discussion for another time, Mr. Barrett.
So this is the third time the Prime Minister is under investigation for breaking ethics laws. He's already been found guilty twice of breaking the law. And well, we'll see what's going to happen a third time, though we did hear an admission from the Prime Minister today that he ought to have recused himself. So we know the regard the Prime Minister has for ethics laws. It's been referred to, I recall, as Harper's Law. So why is it that this Prime Minister thinks that he's above the law?
I am going to just to take a moment here, Ms. Telford, the relevance here. And I remind members again, we are here to examine how much the government spent in awarding the $912 million sole source contract to We Charity, and how the outsourcing of the Canada Student Service Grant to We Charity proceeded as far as it did.
Sure.
But I will allow that question. Go ahead, Ms. Telford.
Well, first of all, when you suggest that there was an admission in his remarks and his answers to your many questions earlier, I would just want to correct you in saying that actually it's something he said to Canadians some time ago now. And I believe that the Prime Minister and our entire office and government take ethics extremely strongly. It's a very important thing for us. And it's why we go back and forth with the Ethics Commissioner's office all the time, and we fully cooperate with anything the Ethics Commissioner asks us to look into or to do.
Back to Mr. Barrett.
Well, I mean, he's been found guilty of breaking the act twice. I know that the back and forth goes on often, and that's because he's been under investigation so many times. As his chief, did you read the act after the first time he was found guilty of breaking it?
I've actually read the act before that. But when you say that's, again, you're suggesting that the reason we're going back and forth with the Ethics Commissioner's Office was for reasons that, yes, that was the case, but we also go back and forth with the Ethics Commissioner's Office all the time, whether it's annual disclosures or questions, because we want to make sure we're getting the interpretations that do also change over time that we interpret things as accurately as possible, as often as possible.
Mr. Barrett.
After March 1st, how many times did the PMO communicate with the Kielburgers or any of their intermediaries?
So there were, I looked into this, and there were a handful of interactions with the Prime Minister's Office and the WE organization around the Canada Summer Student Grant between then and the launch of the program. There was only one in prior to the launch period of the program. It was in early May, where one of the policy staff did what is very, very normal in their job, which is to speak to stakeholder organizations. And it was a very general discussion, and they actually redirected the stakeholder, the WE organization, to ESDC officials, which was the more appropriate place to be able to get answers for the questions they were asking.
We'll let it come back to Mr. Barrett, and I didn't outline at the beginning, Ms. Telford, that we are under what we call the COVID-19 rules. We try and keep the answers as tight to the questions as we can, or I try to, and sometimes I succeed. Mr. Barrett, I won't take that time from you. Go ahead.
And what day did that interaction occur, ma'am?
I believe it was on May 5th.
Okay. The and are you able to tell us which policy staffer made that inquiry?
I was a member of the policy team.
Okay. So the Prime Minister claims today that his staff were working on the program before May 8th. Can you provide this committee a list of everyone that was involved? Can you furnish the committee in writing with everyone that was involved in the decision?
It's public information who all the staff in the Prime Minister's Office are, and I'm here to represent all of those staff as the senior most member of the Prime Minister's Office. So if you have questions about any of them or for any of them, I'm happy to take them today.
Okay, well, the Prime Minister testified today that the option given to the Cabinet was we or nothing, and which was ultimately the outcome, was nothing. Why did the Cabinet accept this supposed binary choice? Why not ask for options? You know, is this a government run by the public service, or is it run by Cabinet? Because the accountability rests with the head of government. It rests with the Cabinet. So I'm getting pretty frustrated hearing, you know, how much respect that the members of Cabinet have for the public service while throwing them under the bus instead of taking accountability for their decisions. So why wouldn't they have required options?
So I want to just address two things you said there. One is not trying to, no one is throwing anyone under the bus here. I'm explaining, and I'm happy to explain what happened. And we relied on the public service and their recommendations, and their recommendation was to proceed. And the question you're asking around, you know, you being frustrated it was a binary choice, that was exactly the kind of question that the Prime Minister and I were asking on May 8th, which caused it to be pulled from the Cabinet agenda that morning so that we could confirm that that was truly the case.
Last question, Mr. Barrett.
Since from March 1st until now, when did you speak with the Prime Minister about the WE organization?
On May 8th was when we first learned that the WE organization was being proposed as the organization to deliver and administer this program. And so that is when we spoke about it.
Thank you both. We'll turn now to Ms. Zerowitz for 6 minutes, followed by Mr. Fortin. Ms. Zerowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Telford, for joining us today. We really are grateful. You know, it's we always remember to thank our ministers, our Prime Minister, our bureaucrats, but we often forget the amazing team of people that sit in the Prime Minister's office. So I want to say a huge thanks to you and to the amazing team there. I can only imagine how crazy the last few months have been. So thank you for your extraordinary effort. My first question is, You rightly talked about how we've gone through an unprecedented time and the impact to Canadians has been extraordinary. You know, we have asked our politicians, our civil servants, our staff to work at an extraordinary pace to deliver over 70 emergency programs at a spend of over $200 billion. And this is just a general question. Were there any additional processes put in place or any special oversight mechanisms because of the increased level of spending and the speed of the decision making?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's actually one of the things I've been reflecting on, and the team has been reflecting on in this last period of time, is whether there is additional rigor that could be put in place even in a time of crisis. Our focus, for the reasons you said and the reasons I said in my opening statement, has been on getting support to Canadians as quickly as we can and to as many as we can. And that does not mean, and that is why we also held up the proposal on May 8th, that rigor does not need to be applied. And we know that rigor has been being applied by the public service throughout, by staff and ministers' offices and ministers throughout. But obviously things have moved in compressed time periods, and thus, you know, the time isn't necessarily spent in the same ways as in the past. And we need to think about how to ensure we continue to have rigor as you would in a normal time, in a time of crisis as well.
Thank you for that. My next question is, there's a lot of questions that come up at our committee around the change in the WE board, the layoffs that took place, whether or not we had registered themselves as a lobbyist or not. And we have heard that the bureaucrats have, that we have a lot of confidence that our bureaucrats have done their due diligence. My question to you is just, I just want to make sure that Canadians understand that there is, what's the responsibility of the bureaucrats versus what actually comes to Cabinet. If you could just maybe elaborate on that, I'd be grateful. And I think just one more point I want to make, just because I think there was a little bit of misinformation. We did receive from Rachel Warnick that there were 8 organizations that were actually assessed by ESDC officials to potentially deliver CSSG. And we also heard that ESDC officials held 2 calls with Canada Service Corps to see whether or not they could actually, to discuss this particular program. But anyways, if you could just maybe talk so that people can understand that division.
So in terms of, I think obviously the department that is presenting the memorandum to Cabinet, along with departments that work, because many different departments, especially in this time, everyone was rolling up their sleeves and working on a number of different projects at once, and supporting different departments were supporting each other with their work in truly unprecedented ways. What ultimately comes to Cabinet is a memorandum to Cabinet that summarizes those recommendations, summarizes the due diligence that has been done. And it was there that we saw that the recommendation that said that there is this one organization that is able to deliver this program. I think, you know, one of the differences is there are all kinds of briefing notes that go back and forth between departments on all kinds of details within it, that we're looking at some of those assessments that you describe, and that I believe you've had officials, I know you've had officials who have come to committee and described them. And there's all kinds of work done between ministers' offices and departments leading up to that memorandum of Cabinet that then summarizes the information they've put together and makes a recommendation to Cabinet.
Thank you. My next question is, I know that there was a lot of anxiousness to ensure that